In this section, we'll be reviewing the botany of cannabis, and our learning outcomes are to just review general aspects of the cannabis plant and identify the key parts that are important, understand some of the growth patterns. We'll learn how to determine the sex of the cannabis plant, review basic growing conditions, and then just compare indoor with outdoor growth. All right, let's get started. So cannabis is an annual dioecious flowering herb. So let's break that down a little bit. Annual, any kind of an annual plant, just means that it propagates by seed, and you have to reseed it every year. Sometimes they will self-seed, but really what you need to do is to reseed those plants every year if you had your cannabis just kind of growing out in the garden. So it won't survive a winter. It sort of lives its life in one season, and then it dies, and then it's hopefully left behind some seeds for the next year's growth. Dioecious, that just means that there's both a male and a female plant. Some plants are not dioecious, so they have both male and female parts on the plant. With a dioecious plant, it's really important that if you want that plant fertilized, then you have to have a male plant somewhere nearby as well. Flowering, that just means that it produces seeds within an enclosure, so it's a fruiting kind of a plant. And herb just generally classifies plants with any kind of aromatic property to them. So if anyone ever asks you what is cannabis, you can say it's an annual dioecious flowering herb. So let's take a look at the plant parts. And here we have a picture of just kind of a stem. It's a little bit spindly looking, but it's stretched out like that so we can look at some of the individual parts. So the node is that area where the stem is and the branch or a bud or a leaf starts growing out of the stem. That's called the node area. The stem, of course, is just the main stalk of the plant itself. And fan leaves are the leaves that will grow out of the cola, or what we're going to learn about the cola, it's kind of the flowering tops or the buds. So they have these fan leaves kind of growing out of them. Typically, these are trimmed prior to sale. So if you've never seen a live cannabis plant, it would look a little bit different because it will have those fan leaves kind of coming out of it. We'll see a picture of that in a minute. So here in this picture, we see that cola that I'm talking about. Now the cola just refers to the whole flowering top. Now within that flowering top, you might have several different buds in there. And it's the buds that are kind of the coveted part of the cannabis plant. That's what's sold as dry flower, or sometimes it's called dried bud. And those are the individual buds where the cola is all the buds kind of put together. And the bract is the part that kind of encapsulates that reproductive part of the female plant. We're going to look at the reproductive parts in a little bit more detail in a minute. So, and on this picture, you can still see the stem there. You can see the fan leaves, and this is a better way, a better picture of seeing how those fan leaves kind of come out of the cola or out of the bud. Sometimes in plants, when the buds are really big and quite thick and dense, the fan leaves are coming out and they're almost like trapped inside there, and you just see the kind of the tips of them coming out. The next really important part of the cannabis plant is called the trichomes. So trichomes are what give that kind of sugary, crystally look to the cannabis plant, and that will survive the drying process as well. This picture here shows a really nice picture of those little dots. It just looks like it's kind of coated in sugar, or it's got kind of a coating of sort of a sparkly crystal-like look to it. These are the sticky parts that contain the medicine. So cannabinoids and terpenes, that's where they're housed, in those little sticky parts. We're going to look at a close-up of that in a minute. Trichomes are not unique to cannabis. There's quite a few plants out there that have trichomes, but not all trichomes have medicinal qualities in them. And you're going to see these trichomes on the stem and the leaves, but most importantly, and the highest, the sort of where they're clustered the most, is on the buds of the plant. That's where we'll see the most trichomes. But we do find them over the whole plant itself. So there is two types of trichomes. There's non-glandular and glandular. So I just said that there's other plants that do have trichomes, and usually that is the non-glandular type of trichomes. Some of them, like say a stinging nettle, will have a non-glandular trichome that has a little bit of we can call it a poison in there. So that's why if you kind of get some stinging nettle on your skin, you might get some prickles from that and a little itchy rash. But typically, those kind of plants that do have trichomes, non-glandular or glandular trichomes, will feel a little bit sticky when you touch them. So non-glandular trichomes will just look like the plant's a little bit hairy, so some hair coming off the stem, or sometimes you'll see it on one or the other side of the leaves, or maybe even on petals of the flower. But glandular trichomes, those are the type of trichomes that we see on the cannabis plant. Well, we do see both, but the ones that we're really interested in are the glandular trichomes. They're kind of mushroom-like and they have a little bulb on top. So here's a really great magnified picture of glandular trichomes. And you see they're almost like little alien things coming up that have a little bulbous head on them. And that's where all our medicine is. They will retain that stickiness once it has the product has been dried and cured, ready for sale. They'll still have some of that stickiness, but not as much as they have in the live plant. So if you've ever get a chance to touch a live plant, especially as it's getting ready to be harvested, those buds are quite sticky feeling. In fact, they're so sticky feeling that you could push a whole bunch of buds together and kind of pick them up, and they all stick together like kind of like Velcro. They'll stick together. The drier a plant becomes, the less sticky those trichomes are, and so they won't really stick together as well. Some people like to think that the stickiness of a plant is a sign of good quality, and other people feel that's just, being a little bit too picky. But in any case, you want a little bit of stickiness to your dried buds. So as we mentioned earlier, within these glandular trichomes, that's where we'll find all the medicinal qualities or the medicinal properties or constituents of the cannabis plant. The cannabinoids, the terpenes, the flavonoids, they all develop in these glandular terpenes. So the type of flower that we get from the cannabis plant is called an inflorescence. And inflorescence is just a botanical term that talks about a cluster of flowers on a branch. So the female cannabis plant is the one that creates the flowers, and they create what's called an indeterminate inflorescence. So that just means that they start kind of growing at the bottom and they will just keep growing up. If conditions are right, it stays warm, you still have the right light and dark period, it's getting good nutrients, getting lots of water, and it's got room to grow, those buds or those flowers will actually get quite big. And there's some growers that kind of pride themselves on having really big, long, inflorescent buds coming out, but in a lot of plants they're just quite short just because of the way we grow them for commercial use, that growing is kind of stopped at a certain point and then they're harvested. So let's get into a little bit more on the sexual parts of the plant. And this is looking at the female plant, cannabis plant. They have a stigma or two kind of really good indications that you have a female plant. So each flower will have two stigmas that kind of come out, and they'll be colored. So often they'll be white, or sometimes they might be slightly different color. But those are just like two little hair-like strands in the pistil. And if your cannabis plant was to be pollinated, those stigmas are what will catch the pollen. If that pollen was kind of blowing in the wind, those stigmas will just kind of wave around and pick up the pollen as it kind of goes past the plant. The calyx is what we call the very first part of the flower, and then the oval is what will eventually become a seed if that plant gets fertilized. So usually when we're growing cannabis for sale, for medicinal sale, we don't want that female plant to be fertilized. So propagation, how do we get the plant started? So we can start by seed or we can start by cuttings. So if you're starting by a cutting, it's called a clone, and it's basically just taking off usually one of the lower leaves on what we know as the mother plant, or we call it the mother plant because it's kind of donating a leaf as a clone. So those will be cut off. Sometimes they'll put in some sort of rooting hormone or put into a special container that has rooting hormone in it, and then it would give some water, and eventually that will grow roots. So when you have a clone, the genetics of that clone, so mean the properties of it, will be exactly the same as the mother plant. But just know that growing conditions may change the cannabinoid content and the terpene content up a little bit. So if that plant is grown in the exact same conditions as the mother plant, then you'll have exactly the same properties. But usually there's slight variations, even within the same greenhouse or in the same garden area, outdoor growing area. There's going to be slightly different temperatures, slightly different angles of the sun or the light coming through, and it may get, slightly different water or fertilizer as well. So all those things can affect how the plant grows and what the constituents are in it once you're done. So cannabis is a heterozygous plant, and that just means that the seeds will not create a plant identical to the mother plant. So the only way that you can get an identical clone is by taking a snipping off the mother plant. We can grow a seed and it will be close to the mother plant, but also nature can throw in a whole bunch of variables in that as well. One thing to know about the roots of a seed, if a cannabis plant is grown from seed, the root will actually become quite a long taproot. And a taproot is the same kind of root that you might find on, say, a dandelion plant. It has kind of that long, skinny, kind of tapers down root on it. Think of a carrot, that's a taproot as well, where if you're taking a clone, that taproot doesn't really develop, and so your root system is going to be a little bit more diffuse and a little more network-like. That's not all that important for if you're going to try growing, but just know if you sort of have heard that, cannabis has these big long taproots on it, that's only if it has grown from a seed. So if you are growing from a seed, they will germinate in about 3 to 7 days. Older seeds, and I'm hearing about a lot of people sort of finding older seeds in their grandparents' garage or basement or a drawer or something. Sometimes those older seeds, you can try planting them. I have heard of seeds that are 30 years old have sprouted and grown a plant, and other times they don't. So don't give up on that. If you do happen to have some old seeds, give it a try. If you don't have anything after 7 days, then still, keep it moist in any way that you would, like the same way that you would treat any other seedling that you're creating. And I would give it a good 15 to 30 days to see if it's going to have a chance to sprout. Probably if it hasn't sprouted after 30 days, it's probably not a viable seed, but we wouldn't want to just throw it away if it hasn't sprouted within 7 days, just in case, right? You don't want to sort of give up on grandpa's old seeds. The clones, when we take a clone off the mother plant and we put that into some sort of rooting material or into some soil, give it the right moisture conditions, that can take 7 to 10 days to start to grow roots, and then even another several days before it starts to get new leaves on it, so you actually see some active growth on that. So, and again, I've seen clones take up to 2 weeks to develop some sort of root system on them, so you think that it's just sitting there not doing anything, unless it actually withers up and falls over and dies on you. Don't give up on it. Just give it a little bit more time, sort of baby it along, nurture it a little bit, and eventually, hopefully, that will get some roots, and then you'll get a lovely plant out of that. There's something called feminized seeds. Now, feminized seeds are cannabis seeds that have been specifically grown to just eliminate that male chromosome. So that ensures that each seed will grow into a female plant. Now, there's not a 100% guarantee on that. There's no way that a grower, a breeder, a supplier of cannabis seeds can 100% guarantee you that their feminized seeds are going to grow into a feminized plant or a female plant, but there's a much more higher likelihood that that is going to happen. So if you are looking to buy seeds and you don't want to be wasting your money, you might want to look for something that has said it has been feminized. But just know that that's not a guarantee that you're going to have a female plant that will grow flowers for you. If you do get feminized seeds, it'll kind of eliminate some of the waiting period, and it also saves you a little bit of money. Some of these seeds are quite expensive for some different strains of cannabis. I've seen seeds sell for as much as $75 for one seed with no guarantee it's a male or a female seed. So if you're buying feminized seed, it's a little less likely that you're going to waste your money and have a male plant. Now, of course, the male plants don't produce flowers, so you're not going to get the medicinal qualities from the male plant. Male plants can have other uses if you're juicing. That would be one way. We'll look at that at a future lesson. But mostly you're really looking for the female plant. That's where you have the bulk and the highest concentration of the medicinal values of that. When someone is growing a lot of cannabis plants, they really want to cull out or get rid of any of the male plants. That's because if you let the male plants grow, you really risk fertilizing your female plant, and a fertilized female plant will very quickly, first of all, stop producing flower, and any flowers that are there, all the buds will turn into seeds. And even if there's one or two seeds in your cannabis product, it's considered to be very poor quality. If you're trying to smoke the product, roll it into a joint, or use it in a water pipe or a bong or something like that, they can kind of snap and pop, and it just makes for a much more inferior product. Plus, you're going to lose a lot of the medicinal qualities because your buds that have all the medicine in them have now turned to seed, and so you don't really have a good product to use. So we want to avoid the risk of male plants. Two ways you do that: you buy feminized seeds, or you take a clone off a plant that is known to be a female plant. Then you get another female plant. And that just helps you to stop wasting time around it, or avoid sort of growing an inferior product.